The courtroom echoed with the harsh, mocking laughter of 3 veteran police officers. Standing in shackles before them was a man they thought was just another easy target, a quiet black man they'd framed on a lonely highway stretch. They smirked, waiting for the corrupt judge to throw the book at him. But their smiles vanished when a fleet of black SUVs suddenly surrounded the courthouse, and the quiet defendant calmly reached into his pocket to reveal a credential that made the judge's blood run completely cold. The rusted welcome sign on Interstate 90 read, "Welcome to Fairview, Ohio, a community of trust." Derek Whitmore adjusted his grip on the steering wheel of the 2014 Chevy Malibu and allowed a dry, humorless smile to touch his lips. Trust was the last thing Fairview had to offer. For the past 18 months, an unprecedented amount of federal grant money allocated for rural infrastructure and community policing had vanished into the town's municipal accounts, leaving no paper trail and no public improvements. 3 federal auditors had been sent to investigate. 2 had been run out of town under threat of violence, and the 3rd had been arrested on fabricated drug charges that ruined his career. Derek wasn't an auditor. He was a man who hated loose ends. At 52, with silver at his temples and a quiet, imposing stillness that commanded any room he entered, Derek had recently been confirmed by the Senate as the new director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. But today, he wasn't wearing his tailored Washington suits. He wore a faded navy blue sweater, well-worn denim jeans, and scuffed work boots. There was no security detail trailing him, no armored motorcade. He wanted to see the rot of Fairview with his own eyes. He wanted to feel the temperature of the water before he ordered his agents to drain the swamp. It was 11:45 p.m. The highway was desolate, flanked by towering pines that swallowed the moonlight. Derek drove exactly 2 miles below the speed limit, his hands at 10 and 2, his eyes periodically checking the rear-view mirror. He didn't have to wait long. A pair of headlights aggressively closed the distance from behind, riding his bumper so closely that the glare blinded his rearview mirror. Derek maintained his speed. He didn't tap the brakes. He didn't swerve. A moment later, the blinding lights flared with the distinct, strobing flash of red and blues. The siren chirped, a sharp, authoritative command to pull over. Derek engaged his turn signal, smoothly pulling the Malibu onto the gravel shoulder. He placed the car in park, turned off the engine, and rolled down his window. He placed both hands firmly on the steering wheel where they were clearly visible. He took a slow, deep breath, shifting his mindset from the director of the FBI to the role he was about to play. A weary, out-of-town traveler. In the side mirror, he watched 2 figures step out of the sleek, heavily modified police cruiser. The cruiser itself was a red flag, an $80,000 pursuit vehicle in a town that supposedly couldn't afford to fix its potholes. The first officer approached the driver's side, his hand resting casually but intentionally on the butt of his holstered sidearm. He was thick-necked, chewing a piece of gum with a slow, aggressive rhythm. His name tag read Roscoe. The second officer, a younger, nervous-looking man named Munson, flanked the passenger side, shining a blinding, high-lumen maglight directly into Derek's eyes. "License, registration, and proof of insurance," Officer Trent Roscoe barked, skipping any form of greeting. "Evening, officer," Derek said, his voice calm, pitched with a polite deference. "May I ask why I was pulled over?" "I asked the questions, buddy," Roscoe snapped, leaning closer to the window. He smelled faintly of stale coffee and chewing tobacco. "You were swerving back there. Crossed the center line twice. License and registration. Now." "I assure you I was maintaining my lane," Derek replied evenly, keeping his hands on the wheel. "My wallet is in my back right pocket. My registration is in the glove compartment." I'm going to reach for them now. Is that all right? Roscoe smirked, shooting a glance over the roof of the car to his partner. Listen to this guy, Munson. Speaks like a lawyer. Go ahead, reach for it. But do it slow. Derek retrieved his wallet and handed over his driver's license, a legally valid but functionally sterile alias ID, issued by the Bureau for Undercover Transit, Marcus Davies, a civilian from Maryland. He then produced the registration. Roscoe snatched the documents, shining his light on the ID and then back at Derek's face. Maryland. Long way from home, Marcus. What brings you to Fairview at midnight? Looking for trouble? Just passing through on my way to Chicago, Derek answered mildly. I prefer driving at night. Less traffic. Step out of the vehicle, Roscoe ordered abruptly. Derek didn't move immediately. Officer, I haven't committed a traffic violation. I've provided my documentation. Am I under arrest? Roscoe's face flushed. The veneer of routine traffic enforcement vanished, replaced by the raw, ugly arrogance of a man who operated with absolute impunity. He unclipped his holster. I said, "Step out of the damn car. You're exhibiting nervous behavior, and I smell marijuana. That gives me probable cause. Out!" Derek knew the script. Title 18, United States Code, Section 242. Deprivation of rights under color of law. He was cataloguing every single infraction in his mind, building a mental dossier that would soon bury these men. He slowly unbuckled his seatbelt and stepped out into the crisp night air. He was a tall man, standing 6'2", and for a fleeting second, Roscoe took a subconscious step back, momentarily intimidated by Derek's sheer physical presence. But the badge on Roscoe's chest quickly reinflated his ego. "Hands on the hood! Legs spread!" Roscoe shouted. Derek complied, placing his palms on the cool metal of the Malibu. Roscoe kicked Derek's legs further apart, nearly knocking him off balance, and began a rough, invasive pat-down. He emptied Derek's pockets, tossing a cell phone, a money clip, and a set of keys onto the hood. "Search the car, Munson," Roscoe commanded. "Officer, I do not consent to a search of my vehicle," Derek stated loudly and clearly, ensuring his voice would be picked up by the dashcam on their cruiser, if it was even turned on. "Don't care," Roscoe whispered right into Derek's ear. "You don't have rights here, Marcus. You're in my town." For 10 minutes, Derek stood silently against the hood, while Munson tore apart the interior of the Malibu. Seats were yanked out of place, compartments were emptied, and belongings were tossed onto the muddy gravel. Finally, Munson emerged from the driver's side, holding up a small, clear plastic baggie containing a white, powdery substance. "Look what I found tucked under the floor mat, Trent," Munson said, his voice trembling slightly with the adrenaline of the lie. Roscoe chuckled, a low, cruel sound. "Well, well, well. Passing through to Chicago, huh? Looks like you're trafficking a controlled substance, Marcus. That's a felony." Derek stared at the baggie. He felt a profound, chilling anger, not for himself, but for the hundreds of voiceless citizens who had undoubtedly stood in this exact spot, terrified and powerless as their lives were destroyed by these predators. "That does not belong to me," Derek said, his voice dropping an octave, the deferential tone completely gone. "And you know it." Roscoe slammed Derek's chest against the hood, pulling his arms violently behind his back. The cold steel of handcuffs ratcheted tightly around his wrists, biting into his skin. "You have the right to remain silent," Roscoe sneered, reading the Miranda warning like a morbid joke. "I highly suggest you use it, because right now you're looking at 10 years in the state pen." They shoved him into the back of the cruiser. As the door slammed shut, enclosing him in the cage, Derek sat perfectly upright. The trap had been set, and the mice had just taken the cheese. They thought they had caught a stray dog, They had no idea they had just dragged a wolf into their own den. The Fairview Police Department operated out of a brutalist brick building on the edge of town, a structure that looked more like a bunker than a public service facility. Inside, it smelled of industrial bleach, stale sweat, and cheap cigars. Derek was dragged through the back entrance, his hand still cuffed behind his back. The precinct was surprisingly active for 1 a.m. Several officers loitered near the booking desk, drinking coffee and laughing loudly. When Roscoe and Munson hauled Derek in, the room went quiet for a moment, before erupting into a chorus of mocking cheers. "Look what the cat dragged in," a heavily tattooed officer yelled. "Roscoe got himself another one." "Major drug bust, boys," Roscoe announced proudly, shoving Derek toward the booking counter. "Maryland plates. Got a baggie of snow under the floorboards. Resisted arrest, too." Derek remained silent. He scanned the room, his trained eyes absorbing every detail. He noticed the expensive tactical gear that wasn't standard issue. He saw a Rolex Submariner on the wrist of the booking sergeant, a watch that cost more than the sergeant's annual salary. He mentally logged the badge numbers, the faces, the locations of the security cameras. Interestingly, the little red light on the corner camera was off. "Name?" the booking sergeant grunted, not looking up from his keyboard. "Marcus Davies," Derek replied evenly. "Empty your pockets." "Oh wait, you already did," the sergeant laughed, tossing Derek's phone and money clip into a plastic bin. "Take his prints and throw him in cell 4. We'll let him marinate until the captain gets in." "I am requesting my right to a phone call," Derek said. His voice easily cut through the noise of the precinct. It wasn't a plea. It was a demand. The officers in the room stopped and turned to look at him. Roscoe stepped up, leaning his face inches from Derek's. "You get a phone call when we say you get a phone call," Roscoe spat. "Right now the phones are down. Tragic, isn't it?" The room erupted into laughter. The mockery echoed off the cinder-block walls. They thought it was hilarious. A black man from out of state, locked in their cage, demanding his rights. It was the ultimate joke to them. Derek didn't flinch. He didn't break eye contact with Roscoe. "I understand. I'm documenting the refusal." "Document this," Roscoe laughed, shoving Derek hard in the back, forcing him down the narrow hallway toward the holding cells. Cell 4 was a cramped 6x8 concrete box with a rusted steel toilet and a solid metal bench. The iron bars slammed shut with a definitive ringing crash. The lock turned. "Get comfortable, Marcus," Munson sneered from the other side of the bars. "You're going to be here a long time." For the next 6 hours, Derek sat motionless on the cold metal bench. He didn't sleep. He didn't pace. He sat with the disciplined stillness of a man who had spent his life surviving high-stakes standoffs. He listened. He heard the officers falsifying the arrest report in the next room. He heard them laughing about how easy it was to pad the stats. He heard the systemic corruption breathing through the very walls of the precinct. At 8 a.m., the heavy door at the end of the cell block swung open. Footsteps echoed down the hall. Slow, deliberate, authoritative. A man in a crisp white shirt with gold captain's bars on the collar stopped in front of cell 4. Captain Thomas Decker was in his late 50s, sporting a silver mustache and eyes deadened by decades of unchecked power. He held a manila folder in his hands. "Mr. Davies," Decker said, his voice slick and polished, a stark contrast to Roscoe's crude barking. "I am Captain Decker. I run this department." Derek looked up slowly but didn't stand. "Captain," Decker unlocked the cell door and stepped inside, leaving the door cracked behind him. He leaned against the concrete wall, looking down at Derek. "My officers tell me you were swerving all over Interstate 90. Tell me you had an aggressive demeanor, and unfortunately for you, they found a substantial amount of cocaine in your vehicle." Your officers planted it, Derek said simply, and the dashcam footage from their cruiser will show I maintained my lane perfectly. Assuming, of course, the footage hasn't mysteriously disappeared. Decker offered a tight, predatory smile. You're a smart guy, Marcus. Too smart for your own good, maybe. Here's the reality of the situation. That dashcam malfunctioned last night. Shame, really. So it's your word against the sworn testimony of 2 decorated police officers. In Fairview, we protect our own. And the judge in this town? Well, let's just say he values the peace and quiet we provide. You're extorting me, Derek observed, his tone analytical, almost bored. Decker chuckled. I'm offering you a life raft. You see, a felony possession charge carries mandatory prison time. Your life, your career, whatever it is you do back in Maryland, gone. But we are reasonable men. Sometimes evidence gets misplaced. Sometimes charges get downgraded to simple civil infractions. A heavy fine, say $25,000, paid directly to the town's infrastructure fund, and you walk out of here by lunch. There it was. The grift. The exact mechanism they were using to siphon money from terrified tourists and minorities passing through their jurisdiction. It was a sophisticated, small-town shakedown operation. $25,000, Derek repeated, letting the number hang in the air. Cash or wire transfer, Decker confirmed smoothly. Pay the fine, you go home. Fight it, and you'll spend the next decade breaking rocks in the state penitentiary. Think about it. Arraignment is at 10 a.m. I suggest you make the right choice. Decker turned and walked out, the heavy iron bars slamming shut once more. Derek remained on the bench. He didn't feel fear. He felt a cold, calculated wrath. He had enough evidence now to dismantle the entire department. But he didn't just want the cops. He wanted the judge who authorized this extortion. He wanted the whole rotting tree pulled up by the roots. He waited for 10 a.m. The Fairview Municipal Courthouse was a grand, colonial-style building that belied the ugly realities taking place inside its walls. It was connected to the precinct via an underground tunnel. At 9:45 a.m., Derek was shackled at the wrists and ankles, an excessive security measure for a non-violent drug charge designed entirely to humiliate and break the spirit of the accused. Roscoe and Munson escorted him through the tunnel. "Walk faster, deadbeat," Roscoe barked, giving the chain between Derek's wrists a sharp yank. Derek walked with his head held high, his posture impeccably straight. The shackles clinked a rhythmic, metallic beat on the concrete floor. They entered Courtroom B. The room was mostly empty, save for a few local lawyers, a bored-looking bailiff, and a slick, sharp-suited man reviewing files at the prosecutor's table. Miles Langdon. Langdon was the district attorney, another cog in the Fairview machine. In the back row of the gallery, Roscoe and Munson took their seats, kicking their boots up on the wooden pews, whispering and laughing as they waited for the show to begin. "All rise," the bailiff shouted, his voice echoing off the high ceiling. The Honorable Judge Samuel Higgins presiding. Judge Higgins emerged from chambers, his black robe swishing aggressively. He was a red-faced, heavy-set man who looked like he'd missed his calling as a drill sergeant. He slammed his gavel down before even taking his seat. "Be seated. Let's get this over with. Call the first case. Docket number 44-09, State of Ohio versus Marcus Davis," Prosecutor Langdon announced, stepping up to the podium. Charges: felony possession of a controlled substance with intent to distribute, resisting arrest, and reckless endangerment. "Step forward, Mr. Davies," Judge Higgins ordered, peering over his spectacles with a look of profound disdain. Derek shuffled forward, his chains rattling. He stood alone at the defense table. "You are appearing without counsel, Mr. Davies," Higgins noted. "Are you requesting a public defender? Though frankly, looking at the evidence before me, Jesus himself couldn't get you off." A burst of laughter erupted from the back of the courtroom. Roscoe and Munson high-fived. The judge didn't even attempt to silence them. Instead, he offered a faint smirk. "I am waiving my right to counsel, Your Honor," Derek said. His voice was resonant, carrying effortlessly to every corner of the room. It was not the voice of a broken man. "I will be representing myself." Prosecutor Langdon scoffed audibly. "Your Honor, the state requests bail be denied. The defendant is an out-of-state flight risk with significant quantities of narcotics found in his vehicle." "Hold on, Mr. Langdon," Higgins said, leaning forward, resting his elbows on the heavy oak bench. He looked at Derek with false pity. "Now, Mr. Davies, I understand my officers had a little chat with you this morning. This town doesn't want to ruin your life. If you're willing to accept a plea agreement, say, pleading guilty to a municipal disturbance, accompanied by a restitution fine of $25,000, we can wrap this up right now." Derek looked from the smirking prosecutor to the corrupt judge, and then back to the laughing cops in the gallery. "No, Your Honor," Derek said firmly. "I will not be accepting a plea deal. Furthermore, I am requesting that the charges be immediately dismissed with prejudice on the grounds of egregious prosecutorial misconduct, falsification of evidence, and multiple violations of Title 18, Section 242. The courtroom fell silent. The laughter in the back abruptly stopped. Judge Higgins blinked, his face flushing a deeper shade of red. "Excuse me? Are you quoting federal statutes in my courtroom, boy?" "I am, Your Honor," Derek replied, taking a step closer to the bench, "because the arrest report filed by Officer Roscoe is a fabrication. The dashcam footage, which I know for a fact is stored on a remote cloud server managed by the state, not local precinct servers, will prove I committed no traffic violation. The narcotics were planted, and Captain Decker's attempt to extort $25,000 from me in holding cell 4 constitutes a federal racketeering charge." Prosecutor Langdon jumped up. "Objection. Your Honor, the defendant is making wild, slanderous accusations to distract from his own guilt." "Sustained!" Higgins roared, slamming his gavel. "Listen to me, you arrogant son of a beat—" "No, Judge Higgins, you will listen to me," Derek interrupted. The sheer force of his command echoed off the walls, freezing the judge mid-sentence. The deference was gone. The undercover persona of Marcus Davies melted away, revealing the steel beneath. "You are operating a criminal syndicate, masquerading as a judicial circuit," Derek continued, his voice echoing with absolute authority. "You are siphoning federal infrastructure grants through fraudulent municipal fines. I have been in this town for 12 hours, and I have witnessed enough constitutional violations to put every sworn officer in this building in federal prison for the rest of their natural lives." "Bailiff, gag him! Hold him in contempt!" Higgins screamed, spit flying from his lips. Roscoe and Munson leaped up from the pews, rushing down the aisle toward Derek, reaching for their batons. "You're dead, Davies!" Roscoe snarled. Derek didn't flinch. He didn't retreat. He simply turned to face the charging officers, a cold, dangerous fire in his eyes. At that exact second, the heavy, reinforced oak doors of the courtroom violently burst open. The sound was like a gunshot. Roscoe and Munson froze in their tracks. Judge Higgins dropped his gavel. Pouring into the courtroom was a tidal wave of men and women clad in dark tactical gear, heavy body armor, and olive-drab windbreakers emblazoned with 3 massive bright yellow letters on the back. FBI. "Federal agents! Nobody move! Keep your hands where we can see them!" The lead agent roared, leveling an M4 carbine toward the ceiling. Within 5 seconds, 20 heavily armed federal agents had secured the room. 2 agents tackled Roscoe to the ground before he could even draw his weapon, pinning him to the marble floor. Another threw Munson against the gallery pews, slapping zip ties onto his wrists. "What is the meaning of this?" Judge Higgins shrieked, standing up behind his bench, his face pale with terror. "This is my courtroom. I demand you leave immediately." A tall, sharp-suited man, special agent in charge. Vance. Wait, Vance is a band name. Special agent in charge Caleb Reed stepped out from the formation of tactical agents. He ignored the judge completely. Instead, he walked straight up to Derek, who was still standing at the defense table in shackles. Reed pulled a key from his pocket, quickly unlocking the handcuffs and leg irons. "Our apologies for the delay, Director," Agent Reed said respectfully, handing Derek his suit jacket and a sleek leather wallet that had been confiscated at the precinct. "We wanted to ensure the wire was fully recorded before we breached." The word hung in the absolute silence of the room. Director Roscoe, currently eating the marble floor with a boot on his neck, looked up with wide, horrified eyes. Munson was openly weeping. Prosecutor Langdon slowly sat down in his chair, staring blankly at the wall. Judge Higgins's mouth opened and closed like a suffocating fish. "Director? Director of—" Derek slowly rolled his shoulders, feeling the blood return to his hands. He opened the leather wallet and calmly pulled out a heavy, gold-enameled badge and photo, ID, holding it up for the judge to see. "My name is Derek Whitmore," he said, his voice dropping into a deadly, quiet register that promised absolute ruin. "I am the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. And Judge Higgins, you are under arrest." The silence in courtroom B was absolute, broken only by the ragged, panicked breathing of the men who had ruled Fairview with an iron fist just 60 seconds prior. The revelation struck them with the force of a physical blow. The black man they had targeted, mocked, and attempted to extort wasn't a helpless traveler. He was the apex predator of federal law enforcement. Judge Samuel Higgins collapsed backward into his high-backed leather chair, his gavel slipping from his sweaty fingers to clatter onto the floor. The aggressive red flush in his cheeks drained away, leaving him a sickly, terrifying shade of pale. This is a misunderstanding," Higgins stammered, his voice trembling so violently he could barely form the words. "Director Whitmore, I had no idea. We were acting on the police report provided to the bench. I am an impartial servant of the law." Derek buttoned his suit jacket, adjusting his cuffs with a slow, deliberate precision that made the judge flinch. "You are a parasite, Samuel, and you aren't impartial. For the last 6 hours, an encrypted microtransmitter woven into the collar of my sweater has been broadcasting every word spoken in this jurisdiction directly to a secure server at Quantico." Prosecutor Miles Langdon let out a pathetic, high-pitched whimper. He scrambled backward, knocking over his chair, holding his hands up as if physically surrendering to the FBI agents securing the perimeter. "You're all on tape," Derek continued, his voice echoing coldly through the marble room. "The extortion attempt by your precinct captain, the falsified police reports, the deliberate suppression of my constitutional rights, and your specific offer, Judge Higgins, to launder a $25,000 bribe as a municipal fine." On the floor, Officer Trent Roscoe groaned against the heavy boot of the tactical agent pinning his neck. "You set us up!" he spat, blood leaking from a busted lip. "This is entrapment! You can't do this!" Derek walked slowly around the defense table and stood over Roscoe. He looked down at the man who had slammed him against the hood of a car just hours earlier. "Entrapment implies I induced you to commit a crime you wouldn't otherwise commit, Trent. I merely drove down a public interstate. The criminality was entirely your own. Derek turned to Special Agent in charge, Caleb Reed. Process them. I want Higgins, Langdon, and these 2 officers transported to the federal holding facility in Cleveland immediately. Do not process them through the local precinct. They are to be kept in solitary confinement. No phone calls, no bail hearings until a federal magistrate is assigned. Understood, Director. Reed nodded. What about the precinct? We take it, Derek said simply. As Higgins was dragged from his bench, weeping and screaming about his political connections, Derek strode out of the courtroom. The underground tunnel connecting the courthouse to the police station, previously a dark corridor where Derek had been yanked by chains, was now flooded with federal agents moving with lethal, synchronized precision. Over at the Fairview Police Department, Captain Thomas Decker was having a very good morning. He was sitting behind his mahogany desk, sipping black coffee, completely unaware that his empire had just collapsed next door. He was in the middle of counting a stack of cash from a different fine when the heavy wooden door to his office exploded inward, ripped off its hinges by a steel battering ram. Decker jumped out of his chair, instinctively reaching for the Glock 19 holstered on his hip. Hands off the weapon! FBI, get on the ground! 4 laser sights painted Decker's chest instantly. The captain froze. The coffee mug shattered on the floor, brown liquid seeping into the expensive Persian rug. He slowly raised his hands, his mind racing to comprehend the nightmare unfolding in his sanctuary. Agents swarmed the office, pushing Decker face down onto the floor and securing his wrists with heavy-duty zip ties. The rest of the precinct was pure chaos. Officers who had been laughing at Derek's arrest hours earlier were now being disarmed, stripped of their badges, and lined up against the cinder-block walls of their own station. Derek walked into Decker's office just as an agent hauled the captain to his feet. Decker looked at Derek, recognition sparking in his eyes, followed immediately by a profound, crushing terror. You, Decker whispered, his bravado entirely evaporated. The guy from Cell 4. Your infrastructure fund is officially bankrupt, Captain, Derek said, stepping over the broken coffee mug. He walked behind Decker's desk and placed his hands on the leather chair. Agent Reed, secure all hard drives, physical ledgers and communication devices. I want a forensic accounting team tearing through this room within the hour. Captain Decker and I are going to have a private conversation. The interrogation room at the Fairview precinct was designed to intimidate. It was windowless, freezing cold, and smelled metallic. Just hours ago, Decker's men had used this room to terrorize innocent motorists. Now Decker himself sat handcuffed to the steel table bolted to the floor. Derek Whitmore walked into the room, holding a thick, red manila folder. He didn't sit down immediately. He walked to the corner, reached up, and physically unplugged the precinct's local recording camera. He then placed his own encrypted federal recorder on the table and pressed the green button. Let's talk about survival, Thomas, Derek said, finally taking the seat across from the disgraced captain. Decker swallowed hard. Sweat beaded on his forehead, catching the harsh glare of the overhead fluorescent light. I want a lawyer. I know my rights. You have the right to an attorney, Derek confirmed smoothly. But before you invoke it, I want you to understand the exact geometry of the trap you are currently sitting in. You are facing 22 counts of federal civil rights violations, racketeering, evidence tampering, and extortion. Under the RICO Act, you are looking at a mandatory minimum of 40 years in federal prison. You are 58 years old, Thomas. That is a death sentence. Decker's jaw tightened. You think you can just come in here and topple my town? We have friends, powerful friends in the state capital. Derek offered a cold, humorless smile. He opened the red folder and slid a high-resolution surveillance photograph across the metal table. Decker looked at it, and the remaining color drained from his face. The photograph showed a luxury yacht docked in Miami. Standing on the deck was Captain Decker, shaking hands with a man wearing a white linen suit. "That is Mateo Vargas," Derek said softly, "a senior logistics coordinator for the Sinaloa cartel. A man currently on the FBI's most wanted list." Decker began to shake. I don't know what you're talking about." "Stop lying," Derek snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. "We followed the money, Thomas. The $25,000 extortions, the stolen federal grants, that was just pocket change. Chump change to keep your deputies happy and fat. The real money was in the highways. Interstate 90 runs directly through your jurisdiction. You and your department have been providing armed escorts for cartel shipments moving from the southern border up to Chicago and Detroit." Derek leaned forward, his dark eyes locking onto Decker's, pinning the man in place like a biological specimen. "3 months ago," Derek continued, his tone dropping to a dangerous whisper, "an undercover DEA agent named David Miller got too close to your operation. His car was found wrapped around a pine tree on Route 44. Local police, your police, ruled it a drunk driving accident. The coroner, your coroner, cremated the body before federal investigators could request a second autopsy." Decker was hyperventilating now, his chest heaving against his uniform shirt. "I didn't kill him. I swear to God, I didn't touch the Fed. That was out of my hands." "Whose hands, Thomas?" Derek demanded. "I didn't come to this miserable town to bust a few corrupt traffic cops. I came for the architect. Who ordered the hit on Agent Miller? Who brokered the deal with Vargas? If I tell you I'm dead," Decker whispered, tears of absolute panic welling in his eyes. "They'll kill my family. You don't understand the reach this guy has. If you don't tell me, you are going to United States Penitentiary, Administrative Maximum Facility in Florence, Colorado," Derek stated ruthlessly. "You will spend 23 hours a day in a soundproof concrete box. You will never see the sky. You will never touch another human being, and you will die forgotten. I am the director of the FBI. I can guarantee your family's safety and witness protection, but you have to give me a name. Right now." The silence in the room was suffocating. Decker looked at the surveillance photo, then at the encrypted recorder, and finally at the immovable, relentless force sitting across from him. He broke. "It's Senator Clayton Hammond," Decker choked out, the name tearing from his throat like poison. Derek didn't react, though internally the pieces clicked together with devastating clarity. Senator Hammond was the chairman of the State Appropriations Committee. He was the one who had championed the massive influx of federal infrastructure grants to rural towns like Fairview. "Hammond built the corridor," Decker confessed, the words spilling out in a frantic rush now that the dam had broken. "He used the grants to militarize our department, ensuring we had the firepower to protect the shipments. He set up the offshore shell companies in Delaware under the name Ironclad Logistics. The cartel pays Hammond, Hammond pays me to keep the roads clear, and I let my boys shake down tourists to keep them distracted and loyal." "And Agent Miller?" Derek asked coldly. "Miller found the ledger connecting Ironclad Logistics to the cartel," Decker sobbed. "Hammond panicked. He sent a private security contractor, a fixer, to run Miller off the road. I just covered it up. I swear, that's all I did." Derek stared at the broken man for a long, silent moment. He had the confession. He had the link. The corruption wasn't just a local rot. It was a systemic infection reaching the highest levels of state government. Derek stood up, closing the red folder. "You're going to write all of that down, Captain," Derek said, turning toward the door. and then you are going to testify before a federal grand jury." "Wait!" Decker called out, desperation thick in his voice. "We had a deal! Witness protection for my family." "Your family will be protected," Derek replied without looking back. "But you will still serve time, Thomas. The FBI honors its agreements, but we do not forgive the murder of one of our own." Derek opened the door and stepped out into the chaotic bullpen of the precinct. Agent Reed was waiting for him, holding a secure satellite phone. "Director, the forensic accountants found the ledgers," Reed reported, his eyes wide with disbelief. "It's a massive network, dozens of shell accounts, hundreds of millions of dollars." "I know," Derek said, his voice hard as iron. He looked at the federal agents dismantling the corrupt precinct piece by piece. The first phase of his trap had worked flawlessly. The foot soldiers were eliminated. Now it was time to hunt the king. "Agent Reed," Derek ordered, slipping his arms into his FBI windbreaker. "Spin up the hostage rescue team. Get warrants drafted for the state capitol. We are going to pay a visit to Senator Clayton Hammond. 60 miles away from the crumbling cinder blocks of Fairview, the world changed into a landscape of manicured lawns, towering wrought iron gates, and unadulterated wealth. The private estate of Senator Clayton Hammond sat on 200 acres of pristine Ohio countryside. It was a monument to corruption, built on the blood of the vulnerable and the stolen tax dollars of the working class. Inside his mahogany-paneled study, Senator Hammond sat behind a massive desk, carved from a single slab of imported mahogany. He was a patrician figure, 65 years old, with perfectly coiffed silver hair and a bespoke charcoal suit. He was pouring himself a glass of 20-year-old Macallan when his encrypted satellite phone vibrated on the desk. Hammond frowned. The phone was only meant for emergencies. He set the crystal decanter down and pressed the device to his ear. "Speak," Hammond said, his voice carrying the entitled impatience of a king. "Fairview has gone completely dark," a panicked voice whispered on the other end. It was Special Agent Foster, a mid-level mole Hammond had bought within the FBI's Cleveland field office 3 years ago. "The local lines are dead. The precinct's secure servers are unresponsive. And Senator, the federal magistrate just signed a blind warrant for your arrest. The hostage rescue team is mobilizing." Hammond's blood ran cold, but his political training kept his voice level. "On whose authority?" "The director is in Washington." "No, he's not," Foster stammered, terrified. "Director Whitmore went off the grid 36 hours ago. Rumor is he ran a one-man sting on Interstate 90. He triggered the raid himself. They're coming for you, Clayton. Right now." The line went dead. Hammond stared at the phone. For a decade, he had operated with absolute impunity. He had built an untouchable syndicate, using state legislature as a shield, while acting as the primary logistical conduit for the Sinaloa cartel. It was brilliant, flawless, and highly lucrative. And now, a single man had dismantled the foundation in a matter of hours. Hammond slammed his fist on the desk. He pressed the intercom button. "Donovan, get in here, now!" The heavy oak doors opened silently, and Donovan Cross stepped into the room. Cross was Hammond's primary fixer, a dishonorably discharged former mercenary with dead eyes and a jagged scar running down his jawline. He was the man who had run DEA agent David Miller off the road and ensured the wreckage burned. "We have a catastrophic breach," Hammond barked, moving quickly to a bookshelf. He pulled a specific volume of a legal encyclopedia, revealing a biometric wall safe. He pressed his thumb to the scanner, and the heavy steel door clicked open. Inside were stacks of bearer bonds, a half-dozen forged passports, and an encrypted hard drive containing the backup ledgers for ironclad logistics. "Fairview is compromised. The FBI is en route," Hammond said, stuffing the drives and cash into a leather duffel bag. "Warm up the helicopter. We are flying to the private airstrip in Columbus. Vargas has a jet waiting. We burn the estate." "Understood," Cross said calmly, drawing a suppressed tactical pistol from his shoulder holster. "I'll handle perimeter security. How much time do we have?" "Less than 10 minutes, Hammond replied, zipping the bag. But Hammond's estimate was tragically wrong. The low, rhythmic thumping of rotor blades suddenly rattled the crystal decanter on the desk. It wasn't the high-pitched whine of Hammond's private helicopter. It was the heavy, aggressive pulse of twin-engine Sikorsky UH-60 Black Hawks. "They're already here," Cross hissed, rushing to the reinforced window. Outside, the estate had been completely enveloped. 3 matte black helicopters hovered just above the tree line, fast-roping operators clad in full tactical gear directly onto the manicured lawn. Simultaneously, a convoy of armored bearcats smashed through the wrought-iron front gates, tearing up the immaculate driveway. "To the underground garage, now!" Hammond yelled, abandoning the rest of the cash and sprinting toward the secret door hidden behind the study's fireplace. Cross covered the rear, his pistol raised. They rushed down the narrow concrete staircase that led to a reinforced subterranean bunker and a private tunnel. Hammond's heart pounded furiously against his ribs. He was a politician, a man of backroom deals and tailored suits, completely unequipped for the visceral terror of a tactical siege. They reached the heavy steel blast door at the bottom of the stairs. Cross punched in the security code. The light blinked green, and the heavy door hissed open. "Move, Senator," Cross commanded, stepping through the threshold. But as Cross cleared the doorway, the shadows of the bunker seemed to detach themselves from the walls. A blinding strobe light flared, disorienting both men instantly. Before Cross could raise his weapon, a heavily armored HRT operator stepped out of the blind spot, driving the butt of an M4 rifle directly into Cross's sternum. The impact shattered his ribs and sent the mercenary crashing to the concrete floor, his pistol clattering away into the darkness. "Hands behind your back! Do not move!" The operator roared, dropping his knee onto Cross's spine and securing his wrists with heavy zip ties. Senator Hammond froze, dropping the leather duffel bag. He slowly raised his hands, his breath catching in his throat. Out of the darkness, a figure stepped forward. He wasn't wearing heavy body armor or night vision goggles. He wore a crisp suit jacket over a navy blue sweater. Derek Whitmore looked at the trembling senator with eyes as cold as absolute zero. "Going somewhere, Senator?" Derek asked, his voice echoing off the concrete walls of the bunker. Hammond swallowed hard, his mind scrambling for a lifeline. "Director Whitmore," he tried to say smoothly, though his voice cracked. "This is an unconstitutional invasion of a state official's property. You have no jurisdiction here. I am the chairman of the Appropriations Committee. I will have your badge for this. I will end your career before it even begins." "My career is fine, Clayton," Derek replied, stepping over the neutralized mercenary and kicking the leather duffel bag open to reveal the forged passports. "Yours, however, ended the moment you ordered the assassination of DEA agent David Miller." Hammond flinched but maintained his politician's mask. "I don't know what you're talking about. You have no proof. A confession coerced from a corrupt small-town cop like Decker won't hold up in court." "It's hearsay." "You're right," Derek agreed softly. "Decker's word isn't enough to bury a man with your political connections. That's why we didn't rely on it." Derek pulled a thin, silver smartphone from his jacket pocket. He tapped the screen and held it up. It displayed a live feed from the United States Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Division. "While you were busy packing your bags, my cyber division, working with the Treasury, cracked the routing numbers provided by your mole, Agent Foster," Derek explained. Hammond's eyes widened in horror, Foster, did you really think we didn't know you had a rat in the Cleveland office? Derek said, a predatory smile touching his lips. We fed Foster the Fairview raid coordinates an hour late, just to see who he would call. He called you. And while he was doing that, we seized the servers for ironclad logistics. We have the wire transfers, Clayton. Every dollar you moved for Mateo Vargas. Every bribe you paid to Captain Decker. We even have the digital footprint of the wire you sent Donovan Cross the day Agent Miller was killed. Hammond backed away until his shoulders hit the cold concrete wall. The political armor was gone. The arrogance evaporated. He was nothing but an old, corrupt man caught in a trap he couldn't bribe his way out of. "Vargas will kill me," Hammond whispered, tears finally spilling over his wrinkled cheeks. "If the cartel knows the ledgers are in FBI hands, they will slaughter my entire family. Then I suggest you cooperate fully with the Department of Justice," Derek said. He stepped forward and personally grabbed Hammond by the lapels of his expensive suit, pulling him away from the wall. "Senator Clayton Hammond," Derek declared, his voice ringing with the absolute weight of the law. "You are under arrest for treason, racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit the murder of a federal agent. You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it." Derek shoved the senator into the waiting arms of two HRT operators, who slammed him against the wall and locked heavy steel cuffs around his wrists. The sun rose over Ohio the next morning, painting the sky in vibrant shades of gold and crimson, washing away the darkness that had suffocated Fairview for so long. The fallout was spectacular, swift, and entirely unprecedented. By 8 a.m., national news networks were broadcasting live from the Fairview Municipal Courthouse, where federal agents were hauling out boxes of physical evidence. Chopper footage showed the senator's sprawling estate swarming with forensics teams. The images of heavily armed local police officers being loaded onto federal prison buses went viral globally, a stark and undeniable testament to the consequences of absolute corruption. Derek Whitmore didn't stick around for the press conferences. He left that to the Attorney General and the Department of Justice spokespeople in Washington. He had no desire for the spotlight. He only cared about the mission. The dismantling of the Hammond Syndicate created a massive vacuum. Within 48 hours, the United States Treasury formally indicted Mateo Vargas, freezing over $300 million in cartel assets linked to the ironclad shell accounts. Donovan Cross, facing a lethal injection for the murder of Agent Miller, flipped on the cartel, providing the DEA with the locations of 5 major distribution hubs in the Midwest. The corrupt Judge Higgins, Prosecutor Langdon, Captain Decker, and Officers Roscoe and Munson were all denied bail. They sat in isolation cells in a maximum security federal facility, stripped of their power, their badges, and their false sense of superiority. They would spend the rest of their lives behind bars. Fairview itself was placed under emergency federal receivership. The stolen infrastructure funds were seized from the offshore accounts and funneled back into the community. Within weeks, real auditors, protected by federal marshals, began repairing the damage. New roads were paved, the local schools received their promised funding, and an entirely new, heavily vetted police force was established under strict federal oversight. 2 weeks after the raid, a quiet, solemn ceremony was held at the DEA headquarters in Virginia. Derek stood in the back of the auditorium, wearing his formal dress uniform. He watched as the DEA administrator presented the widow of Agent David Miller with the Medal of Valor. There were no dry eyes in the room. It couldn't bring the young agent back, but it ensured his name was cleared of the slander the Fairview police had manufactured. His sacrifice was honored, and the men who killed him were bound for the darkest cells the government could provide. After the ceremony, Derek returned to his office at the J. Edgar Hoover Building. The expansive room overlooked the heart of Washington, D.C., a city built on ideals that were constantly under threat from human greed. He took off his suit jacket, draped it over his chair, and rolled up his sleeves. He sat down at his desk, which was already piled high with new dossiers, new threats, and new shadows waiting to be exposed. His private secure line rang. Derek picked up the receiver. "Whitmore." "Director." The voice of Special Agent in Charge Caleb Reed came through, crisp and professional. "We have a situation developing in a port authority down in Louisiana. Patterns match a human trafficking ring operating under the guise of maritime logistics. Local law enforcement seems to be looking the other way." Derek looked at the mountain of paperwork on his desk, then glanced out the window at the American flag snapping in the wind above the Capitol. The work never ended. There would always be wolves in sheep's clothing, men who believed the badge gave them the right to act as gods over the innocent. But as long as he drew breath, he would be the apex predator, waiting in the dark to hunt them down. "Get a tactical team on standby, Caleb," Derek said, a quiet, dangerous resolve hardening his voice. "And prep a civilian cover identity for me. I think it's time I took a drive down south." He hung up the phone, his eyes locked on the horizon. The trap was set. The hunt continues. If you were captivated by this real-life style story of absolute justice and the thrilling takedown of deep-rooted corruption, please hit that like button to help support the channel. Don't forget to share this incredible tale of director Derek Whitmore with your friends and family to spread the message that no one is above the law. Finally, make sure to subscribe and